Do you remember the clever little tricks your mom or grandma used in the kitchen back in the 60s? The ones that made dinner stretch a little further, clean up a little easier, and somehow turned scraps into something worth bragging about? These weren't fancy gadgets or trendy hacks. They were simple solutions born out of necessity and a knack for making do. Today, we're digging into 30 kitchen hacks from the 1960s that still work wonders even now. The fridge buffet, turning leftovers into a family smorgasbord night. There was always one night in the 1960s when dinner didn't follow the usual rules. No casserole bubbling in the oven, no neatly carved roast commanding the center of the table. Instead, the refrigerator door opened wide and out came an eclectic parade of dishes. Yesterday's meatloaf sliced thin, a bowl of mashed potatoes stiff from the chill, a few deviled eggs hiding on the top shelf, and that stubborn jar of pickled beets that never seemed to empty. Everything was set out at once, mismatched plates and all, and suddenly dinner felt more like a picnic than a chore. Kids called it the fridge buffet, though mothers knew it as clean out night. This wasn't about laziness, it was about economy and ingenuity. Families cooked nearly every meal at home during this era, and wasting food simply wasn't an option. Leftovers were precious, and the buffet turned them into something surprisingly festive. It saved time for parents worn out from work, laundry, and PTA meetings, and it gave everyone a sense of choice in an era when dinner was usually decided for you. The thrill of picking and choosing, cold fried chicken here, a spoonful of Jell-O salad there, made it feel like a special occasion, even if it was born out of necessity. Looking back, there's a certain magic in this ritual. No two plates looked alike, yet the meal brought everyone to the table in a way even fancier dinners sometimes didn't. Today, with meal prep containers and trendy charcuterie boards, the fridge buffet feels almost ahead of its time. A zero-waste hack disguised as family fun. Maybe it's worth reviving, if only for the nostalgia of seeing the week's stories laid out in Pyrex and foil, waiting to be finished together. Cook with what you have. Substitution mindset. No running to the store. In the kitchens of the 1960s, running to the store mid-recipe wasn't an option. Stores closed early, Sundays were quiet, and most families didn't keep a credit card tucked in their wallet for impulse shopping. When a recipe called for buttermilk and all you had was plain milk, you didn't panic, you improvised. A splash of vinegar or lemon juice transformed it in minutes. No brown sugar? Stir a spoonful of molasses into white sugar. No breadcrumbs? Crush the heel of yesterday's loaf. Cooking with what you had wasn't just frugality. It was a mindset passed down from parents who had survived the Depression and wartime rationing. This approach bred creativity. It taught home cooks to understand ingredients rather than blindly follow recipes. If the pantry lacked butter, shortening would do. If a casserole needed topping and cheese was scarce, a sprinkle of crushed crackers gave the same crunch. Meals were built around what was on hand. Garden vegetables in summer, canned goods in winter, and the result was food that tasted like home because it reflected the rhythms of daily life rather than a glossy magazine spread. Modern cooks might see this as a quaint relic, but it feels strikingly relevant again. Rising grocery costs, unpredictable schedules, and a desire to waste less are pushing people back toward this flexible style of cooking. TikTok might call it fridge foraging or pantry meals, but the principle is the same. Trust your instincts, work with what's available, and avoid the stress of perfection. Reviving this mindset can feel liberating. Instead of racing to the store for one missing ingredient, you adapt and sometimes discover a new favorite variation. The 1960s homemaker didn't just make do. She mastered the art of substitution, proving that resourcefulness can be as satisfying as any fancy recipe. Leftovers equals tomorrow's soup. Endless pot method, perpetual broth. In a 1960s kitchen, a stock pot on the back burner was more than cookware. It was a quiet promise that nothing would go to waste. Every dinner scrap found a second life there. Chicken bones from Sunday's roast, the tough ends of celery, a lone carrot forgotten in the crisper. Instead of throwing them away, mothers and grandmothers added them to a simmering pot of water, seasoning it lightly with salt, pepper, maybe a bay leaf if one was handy. The pot never truly emptied. It evolved day after day, deepening in flavor with every addition. By week's end, it had transformed into a rich broth that could stretch into a hearty soup with just a handful of noodles or a cup of rice. This endless pot method wasn't just practical, it was a kind of quiet alchemy. Each meal contributed to the next past, weaving a thread of continuity through the week. Kids might not have noticed the frugality at play, but they remembered the warmth, a kitchen that always smelled faintly of something savory, a ladle dipped into familiar comfort on chilly nights. In an era when single-income households fed big families, this trick kept both bellies full and budgets intact. Today, chefs call it zero-waste cooking or bone broth and charge premium prices for what was once an ordinary weeknight habit. It's funny how the humblest traditions circle back as trends. Modern cooks, with their high-speed blenders and instant pots, could still learn from the patient rhythm of a simmering stock pot, slow, steady, and forgiving of imperfection. Reviving the perpetual broth is simple. Start with what you have and let time do the work. It's less about the recipe and more about respect for ingredients. After all, why toss out the story of last night's dinner when you can turn it into tomorrow's comfort? Everything in one casserole dish. One-pan wonders that fed crowds. If there was a single dish that defined the 1960s family table, it was the casserole. One humble pan, often Pyrex or enamel, became a stage where noodles, vegetables, bits of leftover meat, and a generous pour of cream of something soup came together to create dinner magic. It wasn't glamorous, but it was comforting in a way fancy roasts never could be. The genius of the casserole lay in its ability to stretch a little of everything into a meal big enough to feed a family of 6, plus a neighbor kid or 2 who happened to stay for supper. The process was almost ritualistic. Mom would scan the fridge, pull together stray ingredients, and layer them in the dish like an artist composing a collage. Last night's chicken, a bag of frozen peas, some egg noodles, and a can of cream of mushroom soup topped with cracker crumbs or shredded cheese. Into the oven it went, and 40 minutes later the whole kitchen smelled like home. Cleanup was blissfully simple. 1 dish to wash, maybe 2 if you counted the serving spoon. These casseroles weren't just about convenience, they were about community. Church potlucks, PTA dinners, and family reunions all revolved around them. Each family had their own variation. Some swore by tuna noodle, others by chicken divan, but the principle remained the same: inexpensive, filling, and endlessly adaptable. Fast forward to today, and the casserole has become oddly retro, even ironic in foodie circles. Yet with grocery prices climbing and lives busier than ever, the logic of the one-pan wonder still holds. TikTok might rebrand it as a dump bake, but the soul of the dish hasn't changed. It's about gathering whatever you have, layering it with love, and letting the oven do the work. Proof that simple solutions can stand the test of time. Boil it, bake it, forget it. Low-maintenance cooking while multitasking. In the 1960s, kitchens were command centers of constant motion. Laundry hummed in the basement, toddlers clattered toys across linoleum floors, and a pot of something, always something, bubbled away on the stove. The magic of boil it, bake it, forget it cooking was that it allowed a homemaker to do 3 chores at once without sacrificing dinner. A pot roast could simmer for hours, unattended except for the occasional stir, while potatoes boiled themselves soft and a cake quietly baked in the oven. No timers, no instant notifications, just trust in the slow rhythm of food and the instinct honed from repetition. This style of cooking grew out of necessity. Most mothers of the era didn't have the luxury of hovering over a dish. They had families to wrangle, errands to run, ironing to finish. Recipes were deliberately forgiving, soups that could simmer an hour longer without complaint, casseroles that held steady in a warm oven while dad finished a late shift. The food didn't demand perfection, it just promised comfort whenever you were ready to sit down. What's remarkable is how this approach created flavors that were anything but forgettable. Slow boiling coaxed tenderness from cheap cuts of meat. Baking low and slow melded ingredients into hearty casseroles that tasted even better the next day. These dishes weren't fussy. They were quietly reliable, the kind of meals you remembered because they never let you down. Today's world of quick fixes and 30-minute meals often overlooks this patient kind of cooking, yet it feels surprisingly modern in spirit. Meal prep, slow cookers, even sheet pan dinners are all echoes of the same philosophy. Get it going, walk away, trust the process. Reviving, boil it, bake it, forget it isn't just nostalgia. It's permission to step out of the kitchen, breathe, and come back to something warm and ready when life finally slows down. Bread bags as freezer bags, recycling packaging. Long before it was trendy, long before eco-friendly hashtags and reusable silicone pouches, 1960s kitchens had a simple, almost invisible habit that feels downright revolutionary today: saving bread bags. Every soft loaf of white sandwich bread came in a thin plastic sleeve, and when the last heel was gone, that bag didn't head to the trash. It was rinsed, dried, and folded neatly in a drawer, ready for a second life. Need to freeze leftover rolls? Bread bag. Stash homemade cookies for the church bake sale? Bread bag. Wrap up a casserole for the neighbor who just had a baby? You guessed it, bread bag. This practice wasn't romantic. It was practical. Plastic bags were a relatively new convenience, and nobody wasted something that useful. Freezers were smaller, and wrapping food tightly meant it lasted longer, stretching precious grocery dollars. The twist tie, saved right along with the bag, became the unsung hero, sealing everything from green beans to leftover birthday cake. Even kids knew the system. Open the drawer, grab a saved bag, and get back to play. There was also a quiet charm in the mismatched labels. Pulling open the freezer door, you might find a bag that once held sunbeam bread, now cradling pork chops or summer blueberries. No one was fooled, of course, but there was comfort in those familiar logos, a reminder of the meal that came before. Fast forward to today, and we've circled back to the same wisdom, only now we call it sustainability. Fancy freezer bags and storage containers exist, but the core idea hasn't changed. Reuse what you have. Bread bags from the 1960s prove that frugality and environmentalism often go hand in hand, even when nobody's talking about carbon footprints. Perhaps the next time you finish a loaf, instead of tossing the bag, you'll fold it neatly and carry on a tradition that quietly served families for decades. Stretching meat with breadcrumbs oats. Meatloaf economy at its best. In the 1960s, meat was prized but rarely abundant. Families fed on single incomes, grocery budgets were tight, and every pound of ground beef had to go further than it reasonably should. The solution was brilliantly simple: stretch it. Cooks folded breadcrumbs, crushed crackers, or even humble rolled oats into the mix, binding it all together with eggs and a splash of milk. Suddenly, 1 pound of beef became enough for a whole loaf that could feed 6 hungry mouths, with a few slices left for sandwiches the next day. The dish most famously associated with this trick was meatloaf, the undisputed weeknight hero of mid-century kitchens. A little filler didn't just save money, it improved texture, turning dense ground meat into something tender and moist. Breadcrumbs absorbed the juices, oats lent a hearty chew, and neither took away from the flavor when seasoned well with onions, ketchup, or a dusting of Worcestershire sauce. The glossy ketchup glaze on top became its own ritual. Kids fought for the end slices with the thickest coating. Stretching meat was more than a hack. It was a mindset. It meant acknowledging limits without feeling deprived. Families who had survived the Great Depression and wartime rationing passed down this habit, and it quietly shaped the way people approached food. Use what you have, make it count, and never let pride keep you from practicality. Today, meatloaf has fallen in and out of fashion, often dismissed as cafeteria fare before being rediscovered by chefs who now call it rustic comfort food. Ironically, modern cooks add fillers for flavor and nutrition, panko for crunch, quinoa for protein, without realizing they're echoing a 1960s survival strategy. In the end, stretching meat wasn't just about saving money, it was about feeding people well, proving that care and creativity could turn scarcity into something deeply satisfying. Homemade stock from scraps, onion skins, bones, carrot tops, pixels, flavor gold. In a 1960s kitchen, nothing went to waste, not even the parts of vegetables most of us toss without a thought. Onion skins, carrot tops, celery leaves, chicken bones, and ham hocks all found their way into a stock pot, simmering quietly on the back burner. It was less about culinary trend and more about common sense. Grocery money stretched only so far, and flavor was too precious to throw away. By the end of the week, those scraps transformed into golden broth, the backbone of countless soups, gravies, and casseroles that defined the era's comfort food. This practice was born out of frugality, but elevated by patience. Cooks knew the best stock wasn't rushed. It whispered on low heat for hours, coaxing every last drop of goodness from what others considered garbage. A pinch of salt, a bay leaf if you had one, maybe a few peppercorns, and suddenly scraps turned into liquid magic. It wasn't glamorous, but when the aroma drifted through the house, it felt like home. Homemade stock also created continuity in the kitchen. Last night's roast roast chicken became tomorrow's chicken soup, and vegetable peelings from Monday's dinner added depth to Friday's casserole. Kids might not have realized they were eating the same ingredients twice, but they knew it tasted good. The stock pot was a quiet link between meals, a small act of care repeated week after week. Ironically, what was once a necessity is now marketed as artisanal bone broth, sold in fancy jars for the price of a whole chicken. But the essence remains the same. Respect what you have, use every part, and let nothing go to waste. Reviving this 1960s habit today isn't just economical. It's a way to slow down, savor the process, and rediscover flavor hiding in plain sight. Powdered milk magic, baking, and stretching dairy budgets. In the 1960s, powdered milk was a quiet hero sitting on pantry shelves, ready to rescue any recipe that called for dairy when fresh milk ran short. Grocery trips were less frequent, refrigerators were smaller, and kids could drain a gallon of milk in a day without warning. Enter the box of dry milk powder, cheap, lightweight, and capable of transforming into liquid milk with just a splash of water and a good stir. It didn't taste exactly like the real thing, but in baking, casseroles, and sauces, no one could tell the difference. For families on tight budgets, powdered milk was an insurance policy. It stretched fresh milk further by mixing the two together, turning 1 gallon into 2. Cookies, pancakes, and bread dough happily soaked up reconstituted milk without complaint. And powdered milk could even be added dry to recipes for extra richness. Chocolate pudding, cream soups, and those whipped mystery desserts that appeared at church potlucks all owed part of their body and sweetness to this humble ingredient. There was also a certain convenience to it. No risk of spoiling, no bulky jugs taking up fridge space, and an almost magical ability to appear exactly when needed, mid-recipe, mid-week, when the nearest store was already closed. For mothers juggling kids, chores, and endless meals, that reliability mattered. Powdered milk fell out of favor once larger refrigerators and 24-hour supermarkets made fresh milk easy to grab, but it's having a quiet comeback. Bakers now tout its ability to boost flavor and improve texture in breads and cookies, and preppers and budget-conscious families see its value in stocking a shelf-stable staple. In truth, it never stopped being practical. It just waited for us to remember. Sometimes the most unglamorous pantry item turns out to be the one that saves dinner again and again. The use every part philosophy, bones, drippings, and stale bread reborn. In the 1960s, kitchens operated on an unspoken rule. Nothing edible went to waste. Bones, fat, and even yesterday's stale bread weren't destined for the trash. They were the starting point for tomorrow's meal. A roast chicken didn't end at the table. The carcass simmered into broth. Beef drippings were carefully poured into a jar and tucked into the fridge, ready to flavor gravy or fry potatoes. Stale bread transformed into breadcrumbs, bread pudding, or the crunchy topping on a casserole. This philosophy wasn't glamorous, but it was quietly ingenious, born of frugality and respect for every hard-earned grocery dollar. The idea came naturally to families whose parents had survived the Great Depression and wartime rationing. Food was expensive, labor was constant, and stretching resources wasn't a choice. It was a way of life. Homemakers learned how to see potential in scraps, onion skins added color to stock, bacon grease became the secret seasoning for green beans, and pickle juice doubled as a marinade. Nothing was merely left over. Everything was a building block for the next dish. What's striking is how this approach fostered flavor rather than compromise. The richest soups came from bones that had already done duty in a roast. The best gravies owed their depth to fat rendered from Sunday's dinner. Even desserts like bread pudding carried the quiet satisfaction of turning waste into comfort. Meals didn't just feed people. They told a story of continuity, linking one day's work to the next. Today, this mindset feels unexpectedly modern. Nose-to-tail cooking and zero-waste kitchens are celebrated by chefs, yet they echo the everyday habits of mid-century home cooks. The use every part philosophy reminds us that resourcefulness isn't a trend, it's timeless wisdom. Reviving it can make us better cooks and maybe more grateful eaters. Prep once, eat twice. Roast chicken turned into sandwiches, soups, and casseroles. In the 1960s, Sunday dinner often meant a roast chicken, golden and crisp, perfuming the house from mid-afternoon onward. It wasn't just a meal, it was a strategy. That single bird wasn't destined to feed the family for one night. It was the cornerstone of several days' worth of dinners. After the carving knife made its rounds and everyone had their fill, the real work began. Carefully picking the bones clean, setting aside every shred of meat, and saving the carcass for stock. Nothing went to waste, and nothing felt repetitive, even when the same chicken quietly anchored half the week's menu. Monday's lunch might bring chicken salad sandwiches, bound with mayonnaise and sweet relish, tucked between slices of white bread. Tuesday's dinner could transform the remaining meat into a bubbling casserole with egg noodles, peas, and cream of mushroom soup. By midweek, the carcass that once seemed picked over would be simmering on the stove, giving up its last bit of flavor for a pot of broth destined to become chicken and rice soup. It was economy disguised as abundance, stretching one modest purchase into a parade of meals. This wasn't just clever budgeting. It was about saving time and sanity. With fewer kitchen gadgets and busier schedules, families relied on these planned leftovers to keep evenings manageable. The trick felt less like cutting corners and more like outsmarting the clock. Dinner was half done before the next day even started. Modern meal prep might dress itself up with glass containers and trendy buzzwords, but the principle is identical. Cook once, eat twice or 3 times. In a world where we crave convenience yet loathe waste, this 1960s habit feels newly relevant. A single roast chicken can still do it all, proving that frugality and flavor have always been on the same team. Assembly line lunches, bulk prep for school lunches. In the 1960s, mornings were a blur of clattering dishes, ringing telephones, and kids scrambling to find their other shoe. Amid the chaos, one ritual quietly kept households running: the assembly line lunch. Instead of making sandwiches one at a time, mothers lined up slices of bread across the counter like tiny canvases, spreading peanut butter, bologna, or tuna salad in rapid succession. A swipe of mayo here, a slice of cheese there. Fold, wrap, and stack into wax paper packets or wax-lined baggies. In under 15 minutes, 5 lunches could be packed, labeled, and tucked into brown paper bags ready for the school bus. This method was born of necessity, not Pinterest-worthy aesthetics. Families were larger, mornings shorter, and convenience foods still limited. There were no pre-packaged snack packs or lunch kits. Fruit was whole, cookies were homemade, and thermoses carried leftover soup rather than juice boxes. The assembly line kept things moving, a quiet choreography that turned chaos into efficiency. Kids might complain about the monotony, apple again, but they rarely went hungry. It also carried a kind of quiet affection. A mother might cut sandwiches diagonally for one child, leave the crusts on for another, or tuck in a handwritten note when someone had a big test. The lunches weren't fancy, but they were personal in a way today's pre-sealed packs can't replicate. Interestingly, this 1960s hack has found its way back into modern kitchens under the banner of meal prep. Instagram may glamorize neat rows of glass containers, but the heart of the practice, batching tasks to save time, is exactly the same. The old assembly line lives on in new form, proof that efficient habits never truly go out of style. And maybe, just maybe, there's still magic in a simple sandwich wrapped in wax paper, ice cube tray, shortcuts, freezing broth, herbs, leftover coffee. In the 1960s, the humble ice cube tray did far more than chilled drinks. Those metal trays with the pull-up handle were a kind of secret weapon, turning tiny compartments into storage for whatever scraps might otherwise be wasted. A few tablespoons of leftover gravy, the dregs of morning coffee, or the last bit of chicken broth after Sunday dinner. All of it could be poured into the tray, frozen solid, and tucked neatly into the freezer. Later, those little cubes were like treasure, instant flavor bombs ready to drop into soups, sauces, or even iced coffee before iced coffee was trendy. This hack suited the era perfectly. Freezer space was limited, and packaging was often reused rather than bought. By portioning liquids into cubes, families could stretch ingredients and avoid spoilage, making sure nothing went down the drain. Herbs got the same treatment, chopped and suspended in water or a drizzle of oil, ready to brighten a winter stew months after the garden had gone dormant. It was efficient, frugal, and quietly ingenious long before anyone called it zero waste. There was also a certain thrill in repurposing an everyday object. Kids saw ice trays as popsicle molds, homemade homemakers saw them as mini storage bins, and suddenly the freezer became a catalog of possibilities. A cube of frozen stock could rescue bland noodles. A cube of leftover coffee transformed into an after-school treat when blended with milk and sugar. Even fancy holiday punches benefited from fruit juice cubes that kept drinks cold without watering them down. Today, silicone molds and freezer hacks flood social media, but the concept remains unchanged. Those little cubes are still the easiest way to capture excess flavor and save yourself effort later. The 1960s homemaker didn't think of herself as trendy. She was simply practical. But her ice cube tray tricks feel just as clever, if not more so, in a world where we're finally catching up to her common sense. Whether freezing leftover coffee for iced lattes, broth for quick soups, or herbs suspended in butter, each tray was a tiny insurance policy against waste, a quiet triumph of thrift and foresight. Dish towel, dough rising, drafty kitchens solved with clever insulation. Baking bread in a 1960s kitchen was often a test of patience and resourcefulness. Central heating wasn't always reliable. Windows rattled with winter drafts, and countertop temperatures could dip low enough to stall yeast entirely. But homemakers had a simple, almost grandmotherly solution: the humble dish towel. After kneading dough to a soft, elastic ball, they'd place it in a bowl, cover it with a clean towel, and often layer on a second or even third for extra warmth. Sometimes the bowl was set near the pilot light of a gas stove, other times atop the refrigerator where residual heat collected. The towel acted as insulation, trapping the dough's own warmth and protecting it from fickle room temperatures. This trick wasn't fancy, but it felt almost magical. Under that soft cotton dome, the dough slowly doubled in size, transforming from a dense lump into something alive with bubbles and promise. Children peeking beneath the towel saw it as a kind of kitchen miracle, a simple covering that turned waiting into wonder. The towel also protected the dough from drafts, dust, or curious little fingers that might poke at it mid-rise. The practice spoke to a broader truth about mid-century cooking. Adaptability ruled the day. There were no proofing drawers or digital thermometers, just instinct and observation. If the dough rose too slowly, another towel was added. If it rose too fast, it was moved to a cooler spot. Bakers relied on touch and timing rather than rigid instructions, and somehow the bread always made it to the table warm and fragrant. Modern kitchens with climate control and specialty gadgets rarely need this hack, yet there's something deeply satisfying about reviving it. A reminder that great bread doesn't require perfection, only patience and a little ingenuity. A simple towel draped with hair still carries the quiet promise of homemade comfort. Oven residual heat, turning off oven early to save gas, electric. In the 1960s, thrift wasn't a trend, it was a way of life. Families watched every penny, and utility bills were no exception. One clever habit emerged in kitchens across America: turning off the oven before the food was technically done and letting the residual heat finish the job. Gas and electric ovens of the era, built with thick insulation and heavy doors, held their warmth for a surprisingly long time. A roast, casserole, or pan of cookies would keep cooking gently, coasting on the heat already built up inside. It was part science, part intuition, and entirely practical. This hack worked because mid-century cooks understood their appliances the way modern cooks understand their phone apps. They knew how long their oven stayed warm, which corners ran hotter, and how much carryover heat a dish could handle. Cutting the power 10 minutes early saved gas or electricity, and just as importantly, reduced the risk of overcooking. It was the kind of unspoken kitchen wisdom passed down from mother to daughter, learned not from cookbooks, but from years of watching dinner come out perfect. The benefits were twofold: money saved and food improved. A baked custard set without cracking, bread crusts stayed tender, and meat rested naturally in the fading warmth. Even after the food came out, thrifty cooks would slip a cold plate or second dish into the warm oven to soften butter or keep dinner rolls cozy until serving time. Today, when energy prices spike and sustainability buzzwords dominate, this old-fashioned trick feels ahead of its time. Modern ovens are still perfectly capable of holding heat. We've just forgotten to trust them. Reviving the habit is as simple as flipping the switch a little early and letting physics do the rest. In the quiet hum of a cooling oven, the 1960s homemaker might nod knowingly. Some lessons never expire. empire. Boiling water, sterilization, kitchen sanitizing without store-bought cleaners. In a 1960s kitchen, cleaning wasn't about bright sprays and perfume disinfectants. It was about heat, plain and simple. When something needed to be truly clean, baby bottles, canning jars, wooden spoons that had seen too many stews, the solution was a pot of rolling, boiling water. It was a method as old as cooking itself and trusted by generations who understood that nothing killed germs more reliably than heat. A few minutes in scalding water, and tools emerged safe, sanitized, and ready for their next job. This practice was especially common in homes where babies or preserving were part of daily life. Before dishwashers were standard and antibacterial wipes lined store shelves, mothers sterilized glass baby bottles on the stovetop every night. Home canners, preparing for winter, boiled jars and lids before filling them with peaches or pickles. Even kitchen cloths and sponges occasionally got the boiling treatment when they started to smell less than fresh. The process required no special ingredients, just water, a sturdy pot, and patience. Frugality played a role too. Store-bought cleaners existed, but they were considered luxuries rather than essentials. Why spend money on something unnecessary when a kettle of water did the job for free? It was a practical kind of cleanliness, rooted in necessity rather than marketing. Ironically, this old-fashioned method has made a quiet comeback. In an era of rising chemical sensitivities and eco-friendly movements, boiling water sterilization feels refreshingly simple. It's sustainable, inexpensive, and deeply effective. A reminder that not every solution needs to come from a bottle. The next time you find yourself hunting for disinfectant, consider this bit of mid-century wisdom. Put the kettle on. As the water roars to life, you can almost hear the echoes of 1,000 kitchens past, where cleanliness wasn't about convenience, but about care and common sense. Boiling water was the universal solution. Poured over cutting boards, knives, or baby bottles, it sanitized without harsh chemicals or extra cost. In homes where budgets were tight and products were few, heat and patience did the heavy lifting. Today, we're quick to reach for sprays and wipes, forgetting that the simplest methods are often the most effective. Reviving this trick doesn't just clean, it connects us to a time when homemakers trusted their instincts and tools they already had. Sometimes the hum of a kettle is all you need to make your kitchen feel cared for and safe once again. Reusing pickle juice, quick brines for veggies or meat.
Today I'm talking about pickle juice. So it would be a shame to get rid of all of this deliciousness once I've eaten the pickles inside of them.
In the 1960s, nothing in the kitchen was wasted, not even the cloudy brine left behind in an empty pickle jar. When the last dill spear was gone, thrifty homemakers saw that jar not as trash, but as an instant shortcut to flavor. That salty, tangy liquid was already infused with spices, garlic, and herbs, perfectly primed to give vegetables or meats a second life. Carrot sticks, hard-boiled eggs, even leftover green beans could be dropped straight into the jar, transforming into new pickles within a few days. It was recycling long before the word felt trendy, and the results were surprisingly delicious. Beyond vegetables, pickle brine had another secret talent: tenderizing and seasoning meat. A quick soak of chicken or pork chops in dill pickle juice worked like a pre-made marinade, infusing flavor while keeping the meat juicy during cooking. Fried chicken brined this way became legendary at potlucks. Crispy on the outside, tangy and tender inside. It was kitchen magic, hiding in plain sight, born purely from the instinct to make every ingredient stretch just a little further. This habit reflected a broader philosophy of the era: use everything you have. A jar of pickle brine was more than a leftover. It was a head start on the next meal. Families learned to trust their taste buds and improvise rather than follow strict recipes. No two brines were exactly alike, which meant every batch of re-pickled vegetables carried its own personality. Fast forward to today, and chefs are rediscovering what mid-century cooks already knew. Pickle brine is celebrated as a secret ingredient in everything from salad dressings to Bloody Mary calories, yet for decades it was simply common sense. Maybe that's the charm of this old trick. It turns waste into flavor, saving money, and surprising your palate in one stroke. The next time you drain a jar of pickles, think twice before pouring it down the sink. There's still a little magic left inside. That tangy liquid can brighten potato salad, tenderize fried chicken, or become the unexpected kick in a pan sauce. It's thrift and creativity in a single jar, proof that good flavor doesn't always come from fancy ingredients. In the 1960s, nothing was wasted, not even the juice from your dill spears, and bringing that habit back today feels like a delicious nod to both sustainability and culinary nostalgia. Sunday baking day, stocking freezer with pies, bread, cookies.
New home-style pound cake. It's another Sara Lee pound cake nobody can resist.
Well, how was dinner?
I love the pound cake.
In many 1960s households, Sunday wasn't just for church and family dinners. It was the unofficial baking marathon of the week. Once the roast was cleared from the oven and the kitchen table wiped clean, out came the mixing bowls and flour sacks. Mothers, often with a helper or two perched on stools, spent the afternoon turning basic pantry staples into enough baked goods to last well into Friday. Pies cooled on the counter, loaves of sandwich bread rose under dish towels, and dozens of cookies lined up like soldiers waiting to be packed away. By evening, the freezer, often a chest style in the basement, was stocked with homemade insurance against the week ahead. This ritual wasn't about indulgence, it was about efficiency. Ovens were large and energy hungry, so firing them up once a week for bulk baking made sense. A single pie crust recipe could be quadrupled, rolled out, and tucked into freezer paper for later. Cookie dough was portioned and frozen, ready to be baked fresh on school mornings or thawed for last-minute guests. Even bread, baked in big batches, was sliced and stored to save weekday mornings from extra work. There was also a quiet rhythm to it, a sense of satisfaction in seeing rows of neatly wrapped baked goods stacked in the freezer. Kids knew that opening the lid meant treasures awaited: chocolate chip cookies for lunch boxes, cinnamon rolls for unexpected company, or a pie to pull out when relatives stopped by unannounced. It turned a single afternoon's labor into a week's worth of convenience, long before meal prep was a buzzword. Today, with modern freezers and endless bakery options, the Sunday baking ritual has faded. Yet there's something appealing about reclaiming it: a slower pace, a fuller pantry, and the comfort of knowing that no matter how busy the week ahead, a homemade treat is always within reach. Back then, this ritual wasn't about perfection or presentation. It was about care woven into the rhythm of family life. The smell of fresh bread or coffee cake signaled comfort, stability, and a promise that the week would start off right. Bringing that back today feels almost radical in its simplicity. It invites us to pause, measure, stir, and watch something transform in the oven, not for likes or applause, but for the quiet reward of slicing into something warm and familiar. In a world of convenience, baking on Sunday reminds us that some traditions are worth slowing down for. The mason jar, everything from storage to shaking homemade dressings.
Hi, I'm Maggie, and today I'm going to introduce you to the mason jar lifestyle.
In the 1960s, the humble mason jar was more than just a vessel for summer's pickles and jams. It was a workhorse for nearly every kitchen task. Long before matching Tupperware sets filled cupboards, families relied on these glass jars for storage, transport, and even food prep. Dried beans, sugar, and coffee grounds sat lined up in tidy rows behind cupboard doors, their contents visible through clear glass. Leftover gravy went into one jar, bacon drippings into another, and yesterday's soup into the biggest one that would fit in the fridge. When you opened the door, it looked like a pantry museum of practicality. But mason jars didn't stop at storage. They doubled as tools. Need to mix a salad dressing? Pour in oil, vinegar, and spices, screw on the lid, and shake until your arm tired. Kids learned this trick early, gleefully rattling mayonnaise and milk for Miracle Whip style style dressings, or helping mom blend pancake batter in a jar with no whisk required. The tight seal made spills unlikely, and cleanup was as easy as rinsing under hot water. Their versatility extended far beyond the kitchen, too. Mason jars transported soups to church potlucks, packed chopped veggies for picnics, and served as impromptu drinking glasses when company outnumbered the goods set. They could withstand heat, cold, and plenty of clumsy handling. Durable, dependable, and endlessly reusable at a time when frugality was second nature. Ironically, what was once simply practical has become fashionable. Today, restaurants serve layered salads and fancy cocktails in mason jars, marketing them as rustic chic. But their real charm lies in their original purpose: solving problems without fuss. The 1960s homemaker didn't need Pinterest to tell her jars were multi-purpose. She discovered that through necessity. And maybe that's why these jars still hold a quiet nostalgia. Each clink of a metal lid is a reminder of a time when one container really could do it all. They stored leftovers, served as drinking glasses, even doubled as lunch pails, proving resourcefulness never goes out of style. Dual-purpose tools: one knife, one bowl, infinite uses. In a 1960s kitchen, gadgets were few, but meals were plentiful. Counter space was limited, storage even more so, and most households didn't own a drawer full of specialty tools. Instead, one sharp knife handled everything from slicing Sunday's roast to chopping onions for Tuesday's casserole. A single wooden spoon stirred cake batter, folded biscuit dough, and scraped the browned bits from the bottom of the gravy pan. One sturdy mixing bowl could cradle bread dough to rise, serve mashed potatoes at dinner, and hold popcorn during family movie night. Versatility wasn't optional, it was essential. This approach wasn't about minimalism as a lifestyle choice, it was simply how people cooked. Specialty gadgets like avocado slicers or garlic presses weren't just rare. They were unnecessary luxuries when one good chef's knife did the job. A homemaker knew how to adapt what she had, improvising as needed. Need a rolling pin? A cleaned wine bottle worked fine. No pastry cutter? Two knives crossed in opposite directions could blend butter into flour just as well. Dual-purpose tools also encouraged a kind of intimacy with the objects themselves. That well-worn cast iron skillet wasn't just a pan. It was the cornerstone of countless breakfasts and suppers, seasoned by years of use and care. Tools were fewer, but each carried weight, memory, and trust. Families passed down wooden spoons and mixing bowls not for nostalgia alone, but because they were still perfectly functional decades later. Ironically, modern cooks are circling back to this philosophy. Minimalist kitchens, capsule collections, and multi-use cookware are suddenly trendy, echoing what 1960s homemakers mastered out of necessity. In a world overflowing with gadgets, there's something refreshing about relying on one sharp knife, one reliable bowl, and your own skill. It proves what mid-century kitchens already knew. It's not about how many tools you own, but how well you use them. Gelatin as a canvas, colorful salads, and layered desserts.
And today I'm going to show you how to make my sister Sveta's peaches and cream jello.
In the 1960s, nothing captured the spirit of kitchen creativity quite like gelatin. It arrived in tiny boxes, jewel-toned powders, promising transformation with just a splash of boiling water and a bit of patience. Once set, it became a shimmering canvas for whatever the homemaker's imagination or pantry allowed. Cook suspended canned fruit, marshmallows, or even grated carrots in quivering towers of lime or strawberry. For special occasions, layers of different colors were poured one after the other, creating striped masterpieces that gleamed proudly on the table. It was edible art, affordable and endlessly adaptable. These creations weren't just desserts. They often wandered into savory territory too. Gelatin salads were a staple at church potlucks and holiday dinners, where olives, celery, or shredded chicken floated in lemon or tomato-flavored molds. To modernize these combinations seem baffling, but in their time, they were considered chic and innovative. Serving a molded salad, especially one turned out perfectly onto a bed of iceberg lettuce, signaled both thrift and flair. It was a dish that made guests smile, if only because they'd never seen anything quite like it. The appeal went beyond novelty. Gelatin dishes were easy to make ahead, forgiving of substitutions, and stunning on a table already crowded with casseroles and roasts. They provided sweetness without heavy richness and brought a flash of color to beige menus. Kids loved the wobbly texture, adults appreciated the light finish after heavy meals, and everyone admired the playful presentation. Though gelatin fell out of fashion in later decades, it has enjoyed quiet revivals. Retro cookbooks are rediscovered, and Instagram trends celebrate the very kitsch that once embarrassed home cooks. In truth, gelatin's charm never vanished. It simply waited for us to remember its possibilities. A shimmering mold sliced to reveal fruit and cream inside still feels like magic, proof that even the simplest pantry staple can become a showstopper in the right hands. Cinnamon sugar toast. Trick, cheap treat, kids' favorite snack.
I'm going to show you how to make cinnamon toast, one of my learn to cook videos.
Few snacks were as universally loved in 1960s kitchens as cinnamon sugar toast. It wasn't flashy or expensive, just a humble slice of white bread, buttered generously and sprinkled with a mixture of cinnamon and sugar kept ready in an old spice jar. A quick toast in the oven or under the broiler turned it golden at the edges, melting the sugar into a crackly glaze that crunched beneath your teeth. For kids racing in from school, cheeks pink from play, this was pure magic, warm, sweet, and ready in minutes. The beauty of the trick was its simplicity and thrift. Cinnamon was cheap, sugar even cheaper, and bread was a constant presence in every pantry. Families often mix the cinnamon and sugar in bulk, storing it in a glass shaker for instant use. Because once you made it once, there was no avoiding the inevitable chorus of, "Can we have some toast?" It was dessert on a shoestring, the kind of treat that turned an ordinary afternoon into something special without ever requiring a trip to the store. It also carried a quiet ritual. Kids learned exactly how much butter to spread to get the sugar to stick, and which corner of the broiler browned just right without burning. Some preferred it barely toasted, others liked it nearly caramelized. Parents loved it for another reason entirely: no measuring, no cleanup, and no complaints from even the pickiest eater. Today, cinnamon sugar toast lives on, though it often hides in nostalgic corners of memory. Food trends have grown more complicated, but this snack's charm lies in how little it asks of you. A slice of bread, a pat of butter, a shake of sweetness, and suddenly you're back at that Formica table, swinging your feet while the radio hums in the background, proof that happiness can fit on a single plate. It's the kind of treat that required no recipe card, just instinct and comfort. Reviving it now feels almost rebellious, a quiet return to simpler pleasures we didn't know we missed. Whipped evaporated milk equals instant luxury, dessert topping magic.
Crazy recipe on how you can make whipped cream from whole fat milk and unsalted butter. It is crazy.
In the 1960s, when budgets were tight and heavy cream felt like a splurge, homemakers discovered a clever workaround hiding in their pantries: evaporated milk. Chilled until icy cold and whipped at high speed, this shelf-stable staple transformed into a billowy topping that looked and felt indulgent, even if it cost only pennies. Spoon it over gelatin molds, puddings, or fruit cocktail, and suddenly dessert felt special, luxurious even, without stretching the weekly grocery allowance. The trick was part science, part ritual. Evaporated milk, with its reduced water content, whipped more easily than regular milk, but temperature was everything. Cans were stored in the fridge overnight, mixing bowls chilled in the freezer, and eager children were warned not to peek while the hand mixer did its work. A sprinkle of sugar and splash of vanilla completed the illusion. No one cared that it wasn't real cream once it crowned a slice of chocolate cake or a humble dish of canned peaches. This hack also fit neatly into the 1960s ethos of making do with what you had. Fresh cream wasn't always available or affordable, but canned goods were dependable and versatile. Evaporated milk could stretch coffee, enrich casseroles, and when whipped, turn an everyday meal into something that felt like a celebration. It was the kind of quiet ingenuity that defined mid-century kitchens, where creativity often bloomed from necessity. Ironically, whipped, evaporated milk has drifted out of modern memory, eclipsed by aerosol whipped cream and ready-made toppings. Yet in an era that celebrates retro, its light, airy texture and nostalgic flavor are perfect for anyone looking to recreate vintage sweets or simply marvel at how a humble can of milk can mimic decadence. Sometimes the simplest tricks, born of frugality, are the ones that feel most magical. Homemade cracker crumbs, substitute for fancy coatings. In the 1960s, when recipes called for breadcrumbs or a crispy coating, many home cooks didn't reach for store-bought panko or specialized mixes. They reached for the cracker tin, saltines, butter crackers, even the broken odds and ends at the bottom of the box were saved, crushed, and transformed into golden crumbs that coated chicken cutlets, topped casseroles, or bound meatloaf together. It was the sort of kitchen alchemy that turned something humble into something crowd-pleasing, a frugal solution that tasted far better than it had any right to. The process was simple and satisfying. Crackers were placed in a paper bag or between sheets of wax paper, then rolled with a bottle, a can, or whatever was handy. Children often helped, pounding them into dust with delight. The resulting crumbs absorbed seasonings beautifully. Paprika, garlic powder, or even just a pat of butter could elevate them into a topping worthy of Sunday dinner. And unlike plain breadcrumbs, cracker crumbs added a subtle saltiness and richness that made even the simplest dishes feel special. This thrifty habit reflected a broader reality of the era. Convenience foods existed, but families still prized stretching every ingredient. Crackers were cheap, shelf-stable, and widely available, making them an ideal fallback when bread went stale too quickly or store-bought coatings felt extravagant. A casserole capped with buttery cracker crumbs became the quintessential potluck dish, comforting and familiar without ever feeling fussy. Today, the trick feels almost genius in its simplicity. In a world of artisanal coatings and pricey pre-made mixes, crushing crackers at home is faster, cheaper, and, let's be honest, often tastier. It's one of those vintage techniques that proves good cooking doesn't have to be complicated. It just has to be clever. Reviving this 1960s hack might be the easiest way to bring a bit of mid-century comfort back to your own kitchen. Fruit cocktails from cans, making canned goods festive. In the 1960s, a can opener was as essential to dessert prep as sugar or flour. When fresh fruit was out of season or out of budget, home cooks turned to pantry staples like canned peaches, pears, and fruit cocktail to create something cheerful and sweet. A simple can of syrup-soaked fruit could be transformed into a centerpiece dessert with little more than whipped topping, a splash of gelatin, or a handful of marshmallows. It was mid-century ingenuity at its finest. Take what you have, make it look special, and watch the kids' eyes light up. The classic fruit cocktail, those syrupy cubes of peach and pear studded with the occasional cherry, was practically a rite of passage for mid-century children, served in dainty glass dishes or scooped over cottage cheese. It felt fancy even if it came straight from a tin. For holidays and church suppers, homemakers layered canned pineapple rings in upside-down cakes or folded mandarin oranges into whipped cream salads, adding a pop of color to otherwise beige buffet tables. This practice wasn't just about convenience, it reflected the optimism of the era. Canned goods symbolized modern progress, allowing families to enjoy tropical flavors in the dead of winter or serve fancy desserts without extra cost. A sprinkle of coconut, a drizzle of condensed milk, and suddenly humble pantry items became something that felt celebratory. Though tastes have shifted and fresh fruit is more accessible now, there's still charm in these retro creations. Canned fruit has a nostalgic sweetness that whispers of simpler times, afternoons spent around formica tables, the hum of the refrigerator in the background, and the delight of an ordinary Tuesday made special. Reviving the practice today isn't about irony. It's about remembering how joy can come from even the humblest can on the shelf. Marshmallow salads, sweet ambrosia nostalgia. In the 1960s, the term salad stretched far beyond lettuce and vinaigrette. On church potluck tables and holiday spreads, you'd often find bowls of what looked more like dessert, fluffy mixtures of whipped topping, canned fruit, and pastel mini marshmallows. These were the famous marshmallow salads, sometimes called ambrosia, a dish that balanced sweetness with just enough tang from pineapple or mandarin oranges to justify its spot alongside ham or turkey. It was equal parts treat and tradition, a dish kids piled high while adults pretended it counted as a side. Ambrosia salads were a study in contrasts, creamy yet airy, sugary yet refreshing, and endlessly adaptable. One family might fold in shredded coconut, another swore by maraschino cherries, and still another added a splash of sour cream to cut through the sweetness. The unspoken rule was that no two versions were alike, and each was fiercely defended as the right way at reunions and church picnics. Part of the fun was recognizing the familiar ingredients, those soft marshmallows, those jewel-toned fruits, while discovering how each cook had made it their own. These salads weren't born from extravagance, but from practicality. Canned fruit and shelf-stable marshmallows were inexpensive and available year-round, making them perfect for stretching budgets and feeding crowds. They also tapped into the mid-century love of convenience and spectacle, easy to prepare ahead, but pretty enough to look special in a cut-glass bowl. Over time, marshmallow salads slipped into kitsch territory, overshadowed by fresher, lighter desserts. But their nostalgia has staying power. Modern potlucks sometimes revive them with a wink, embracing their retro charm and unapologetic sweetness. Because beneath the pastel fluff lies something timeless, a reminder that food doesn't have to be sophisticated to make people smile. A spoonful of ambrosia is pure comfort, proof that joy can be as simple as fruit, cream, and a handful of marshmallows. Upside-down cakes, pineapple rings, cherries, Ashdol's presentation flair. Few desserts scream mid-century charm quite like the pineapple upside-down cake. In 1960s kitchens, this was the showstopper you could make from pantry staples, yet it felt as glamorous as anything from a glossy magazine. The ritual began with canned pineapple rings laid neatly in the bottom of a cast iron skillet or round cake pan, each circle crowned with a ruby red maraschino cherry. A generous sprinkle of brown sugar and a knob of butter melted into caramel beneath the fruit, forming the glossy foundation for the simple batter poured over top. Once baked and flipped, the cake revealed its golden crown, a sticky, jewel-toned masterpiece that never failed to earn gasps. Its brilliance lay in its practicality. Pineapples, preserved in syrup, brought tropical flair to even the most landlocked kitchens, while maraschino cherries added a pop of color that children adored. The cake's single-pan method saved dishes, and the reveal, after inverting it onto a platter, turned dessert into a moment of theater. For homemakers juggling tight budgets and busy schedules, it was a dessert that delivered maximum impact with minimal fuss. Upside-down cakes weren't limited to pineapple. Variations with peaches, apricots, or even canned pears made appearances at potlucks and Sunday dinners, proving the technique adaptable to whatever fruit was on hand. The cake's tender crumbs soaked up the buttery caramel as it cooled, blurring the line between humble and decadent. Though tastes have shifted and elaborate layer cakes dominate modern bake-offs, the upside-down cake retains a nostalgic magic. Its retro aesthetic, with those symmetrical fruit rings and shiny glaze, feels delightfully unfussy, yet celebratory. Revived today, it bridges generations, a dessert your grandmother likely mastered and your guests will still find irresistible. One slice, warm with caramel and sweet fruit, is enough to understand why this simple cake once defined a dessert elegance in mid-century America. What makes it timeless is its versatility. Canned pineapple, fresh peaches, even cranberries in winter. Each variation variation proving that thrift and beauty can share the same plate. Baking one today feels like opening a time capsule where mid-century charm meets modern craving in the sweetest way possible. Coffee can ice cream. Kick the can party dessert. In the 1960s, before electric ice cream makers became a common kitchen luxury, homemade ice cream was a full-body experience, literally. Families turned dessert into an outdoor game called Kick the Can, where cream, sugar, and flavorings were sealed inside a small coffee can, nested in ice and rock salt inside a larger can. Kids would roll, kick, and shake the contraption back and forth across the driveway or backyard, laughing as the can rattled and clanged like a marching band drum. By the time everyone was out of breath, the mixture inside had transformed into soft, scoopable ice cream. The beauty of this method wasn't just its simplicity, it was the communal ritual. Parents didn't need fancy equipment, only 2 empty cans and boundless child energy. Vanilla was the most common flavor, but mid-century cooks weren't afraid to improvise. Chocolate syrup, crushed strawberries, or even instant coffee granules found their way into batches. Each kick brought the family closer to dessert, making the waiting part of the fun rather than a chore. This approach also reflected a broader mid-century practicality. Coffee cans were ubiquitous, sturdy, and endlessly reusable. Rather than tossing them, families gave them second lives as storage containers, lunch pails, and on summer afternoons, ice cream churns. It was frugality disguised as play, teaching kids that homemade treats could rival anything sold at the corner soda fountain. Today, coffee can ice cream has resurged as a nostalgic novelty, popping up in scout camps, retro cooking blogs, and backyard cookouts looking to recapture a simpler joy. In a world of instant desserts and store-bought pints, there's something magical about earning your ice cream through laughter and a little sweat. One bite, cold and sweet after all that kicking, carries the taste of summer evenings, barefoot driveways, and the golden glow of simpler times. Color-coded Tupperware lids. Early meal prep organization hack. In the 1960s, Tupperware wasn't just a storage solution. It was a cultural phenomenon. Long before social media influencers coined the term meal prep, homemakers were quietly mastering the art of organization with one simple trick: color-coded lids. Those soft, burp seal tops came in cheery pastels and bold primaries, and savvy cooks quickly learned to assign them roles. A pink lid meant yesterday's leftover roast beef, green was for vegetables, yellow for sweets, and so on. Without labels or fancy organizers, families could open the fridge and know exactly what was what at a glance. This system thrived in an era when fridges were smaller and meal times more structured. The week's cooking often happened in bulk. Sunday's roast turned into Monday's sandwiches and Tuesday's hash, so having an at-a-glance system kept chaos at bay. Kids could grab the right container without rummaging, and husbands packing lunches on their way to work knew which box held dessert and which held last night's peas. It also spoke to the mid-century love of order and efficiency. Tupperware parties introduced women to entire matching sets, promising not just fresher food, but a tidier kitchen. The rainbow lids added charm to practicality, turning simple storage into something almost stylish. In a time when every penny counted, extending the life of leftovers wasn't just thrifty, it was a small act of household pride. Today, the concept feels strikingly modern. Color coding is a cornerstone of professional kitchens and Instagram-worthy pantries. Yet, the 1960s homemaker pioneered it with nothing more than a few pastel lids and common sense. Reviving this hack requires no special tools, just a willingness to see charm and function in everyday objects. Open a fridge lined with coordinated containers, and you can almost hear the hum of a vintage refrigerator and the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. Each color served as a quiet signal: red for leftovers, blue for tomorrow's lunches, yellow for baking ingredients, removing guesswork from mealtime chaos. It wasn't about trends. It was about practicality wrapped in cheerfulness, a small yet profound way to keep order amid busy days. candlelight dinners on a budget, mood setting, without expense. In the 1960s, romance and elegance didn't have to come with a price tag. A simple trick, dimming the lights and striking a match, could transform the most modest meal into something memorable. Candlelight dinners weren't reserved for anniversaries or special occasions. They were often born from necessity, power outages, tight budgets, or a desire to make leftovers feel less routine-inspired homemakers to set the table with whatever candles were on hand, from tapered dining sticks to half-melted birthday remnants stuck in saucers. The glow softened chipped dishes, disguised humble ingredients, and wrapped the room in an unexpected warmth. This wasn't about extravagance, it was about atmosphere. A pot of spaghetti or a simple casserole took on new life when served by flickering light. Kids quieted down, sensing the change in mood, while parents felt a touch of sophistication without leaving home. It was mid-century resourcefulness at its most charming, creating a sense of occasion out of nothing more than wax and flame. Candlelight dinners also spoke to a broader cultural moment. The 1960s were a time of transition, with families balancing post-war optimism against everyday frugality. Dining out was rare, so homemakers found creative ways to bring fancy into the home. A tablecloth, some background music from the radio, and a few candles could do wonders for morale, turning an ordinary Tuesday into something worth remembering. Today, with decorative candles sold in every store and mood lighting controlled by apps, the simplicity of the original hack feels refreshing. There's a quiet romance in striking a match, in pausing to set the table even when the meal is humble. It's proof that atmosphere doesn't require wealth, just intention. One soft glow, and suddenly dinner becomes more than food. It becomes a moment, a memory in the making. And that's a wrap on our trip through 1960s kitchen wisdom. Proof that clever doesn't have to mean complicated. If these hacks sparked a little nostalgia or gave you ideas to try in your own kitchen, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who loves a good throwback, and subscribe for more forgotten tricks worth bringing back.